Welcome to the FounderVideo podcast, an interview series bringing you the latest and greatest info on B2B marketing, revenue operations, and go-to-market strategy from respected experts. Here is your host, Will Martin.
We're here today with Frederick, Vallaeys, CEO of Optmyzer, PPC management software, and one of the first 500 employees at Google. So we're here to talk about search, how AI is impacting search, and more. So stay tuned for that if you want to learn more. And yeah, it's a pleasure to have you. Welcome, Frederick.
Yeah, it's nice to be on the show, Will. Thanks for having me.
Nice. So yeah, the first question that I wanted to ask you, I usually ask guests about their past and what do people need to know about them in order to understand who they are today and whatnot. And in your case, I think, the most relevant experience was at Google, being one of the first 500 employees there, right? So, and you were as well the first AdWords evangelist. So I'm wondering if you can tell me more about that experience, like how you got in, what were you working on, and how was PPC back then? How do you remember it versus how is it now?
Yeah, a lot of stuff in that question. I mean, I could probably go on for half an hour just about that. But I had graduated in 2000, which was the peak of the dot-com bubble, and then it started like imploding. And I was working in technology, and I was sort of like making a short list of the companies that seemed exciting. And there was this like random little search engine that I didn't really understand the whole buzz around it, but there clearly was buzz. I was like, it's this weird place where you go and it's just a search box. And like, I was expecting pages full of stuff and like more of a portal type vibe. But clearly this Google thing was onto something. So I'm like, well, I should probably put in my resume and see what happens. And they just happened to be looking for someone who spoke Dutch. And I'm originally from Belgium. And they needed someone who spoke Dutch to help translate Google Ads, or AdWords back then, into its sixth language. And so I was lucky enough to join the company at an early stage. And I played hockey with Sergey in the parking lot, and I had Larry over to my house a couple of times. So, they were not billionaires. They were not like super special people. I mean, they were special, but they weren't kind of at that level where they are now. So it was just fun working there. And then I stayed for 10 years. And along the way, I was advertising on Google. So I had discovered PPC back in 1998, doing it on goto.com. And I thought it was super cool, but I was never really making any significant money with it. And then I joined Google, and I get to talk to all of these customer support people working with the biggest advertisers. And I'm like, what's the common thread? Like, what kind of advertisers are these? And we're like, oh yeah, it's a lot of affiliates. I was like, ooh, affiliates, like I know how to do that. So I set up some affiliate accounts and I became a big affiliate for eBay, for 21st Century Car Insurance. And I really learned the ins and outs. It was like, okay, well, here's AdWords, the way that Google is presenting it and the engineers have built it. But how do you actually make money at it? Like, how do you figure out what people are really typing into the search box? So search terms reports didn't exist. So I made those for myself. Conversion tracking didn't exist. So I built that for myself. And then eventually people within Google were like, that's pretty cool. Like, we should be doing some of these efforts as well. And then I got to help the product teams figure out like what do advertisers really need to make this successful. And then for advertisers, like how do you take whatever the engineers have built and how do you make the most out of that? And I turned that into an evangelist role, which allowed me to do quite a bit of travel, go and speak with advertisers and have a lot of fun along the way.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that, man. Love that story. Love that experience. I think it's awesome when you're able to work on something that has become so big so early, right? Being able to work with the product teams to give them direct feedback, especially as an advertiser, right? I mean, no wonder why you ended up building Optmyzer, right? And now understanding everything. But let's talk about.
I can tell you why it's interesting, right? Because once you're a 500 company in the beginning, so on Google, not Optmyzer, but like everything's nimble and you're just like, there's a whole thing about Facebook, like break things was sort of their mantra. And that's the luxury of being a small company is you can push the envelope and you can do things quickly. But now Google gets all this flack. There's always legal issues. There's blowback on the artificial intelligence efforts they have. And it's just like you're a big company, people take notice. So everything by nature just has to become slower and more methodical. And so some of the things that I knew from working with advertisers that they really, really wanted, stuff like, what is my historical quality score? How is my optimization effort helping my quality score either be better or worse? It was very difficult to pull that information from the Google Ads interface. I was like, okay, I can leave the company today and I can go and build that tomorrow. and I know somebody's going to be willing to pay for it. Now, it's not going to make me $1 billion, but there's going to be enough advertisers who are willing to maybe kick in 99 bucks each. And I'm going to make a decent living. I'm going to have fun doing what I'm doing, and I'm going to help people along the way. And so that was sort of the starting premise for Optmyzer. And especially, it was sort of fast-tracked when the management team at Google was changing, and they were like, well, this evangelist stuff is cool, but like, let's figure out how to scale it. Let's can you be at the office more and like tell other people to do what you do? And I was like, well, that's sort of like the complete opposite of an evangelist, right? An evangelist puts a face to that nameless corporation and goes up on stage and takes the flak for whatever is not being built right and takes the feedback back to the product teams to make it better. Like, you can't do that through an army of people. It's a very unique role. I was like, well, if you guys think about it that way, then I'm just gonna, it's time for me to go. I've got some money from the IPO, so like, I'll figure it out. And Optmyzer came along.
Love that, because you got equity, of course. I mean, that's awesome. It played out nice for you. I mean, it's a pity that, as you said, once companies get big enough, especially, I think, like, I was talking with one of our former guests, Cody Schneider. He mentioned that, and I mentioned this in another podcast already, because I think it's such an interesting concept. Whenever a company gets an HR department, that's when they've gotten big enough so that things cannot move as quick as needed to innovate as fast as the market needs it, right? And I think it's tough that you had to leave because, well, not because of that necessarily, but that misunderstanding about the evangelist role and whatnot. But I mean, at the end of the day, it played out well because you ended up building such a good tool. So, it's whatever. What do you think? Okay, so let's touch on, because you mentioned before about PPC being, of course, completely different, right? And how it was at the beginning, how you were, intrigued by, who are these advertisers are using this to advertise, and like, there's different, affiliates. Okay, but let's touch on the current state right now. Like, especially having lived it back then, do you think that Google right now is it's a red ocean, sorry? And if so, how can SEO and PPC marketers stand out, if at all, if they can?
Yeah, well, that's the funny thing about the evolution of AdWords into Google Ads. It used to be more complicated, more time consuming in terms of the tasks that you had to do. So like in the early days, your keyword was your keyword. Google would only show your ads if that word was part of the search term. And so stupid little things like, hey, I got to figure out every single typo that people could use. Like, that wasted time. And that was necessary, but that was also like the advantage that you then got as an advertiser. If you took the time to do these things, then yeah, you'd get really cheap clicks from misspellings that other advertisers weren't competing against you on. And then over time, as Google got more and more automated and machine learning came in, and now generative AI has come in, it's so much automation that presumably would have made things easier. And I think it's made it easier for the masses, right? So if you're a small business and you've heard, hey, PPC, digital marketing, it's critical to being where consumers are. Now it's not that challenging anymore. You can get pretty decent results just by telling Google, here's my domain, my website. They'll figure out the bids, they'll figure out the keywords. It's good, they got it, right? But you as a professional marketer are like, how do you differentiate yourself? How do you stand out? Like, if these little tricks don't work anymore. And that's where I think it's just an evolution, right? So all of these machine learning and automation systems, they rely on the inputs that you give it. So what is a conversion for you? Well, is that somebody filling out a lead gen form on the page, or is that somebody actually putting down the money 2 months later? Right? Is there a CRM that should have been integrated? Are you looking at the right level of conversion at like different lead stages? If you're selling stuff, like, is the value of what you sold the price of the product, or should you take out the shipping cost, even if it was free shipping, right? I mean, you paid for the shipping as the vendor. Should you look at returns? And it's like all of that becomes the trick. That's how do I give the machine better information about the actual value that my business received? Because now the machine can go and figure out, oh, well, these search terms, they tend to correspond or correlate to a high number of returns. So maybe we should bid less for these and more for those. Same thing with lead gen. And so things have gotten simpler in some ways and harder in different ways, because like communicating the right conversion, that's not as simple as like typing in a misspelling of a keyword, right? That actually means you have to talk to your webmaster, your web team to set things up and maybe integrate your CRM into how that feeds back into Google Ads. And I mean, it's not rocket science, but these are things that you have to do to differentiate yourself now. And that's different from how it used to be.
Can you expand a little bit more on that? What are the things that you're seeing are helping marketers differentiate themselves the most when it comes to PPC and SEO these days?
Yeah, I mean, so it's really about, think about generative AI, right? And generative AI can do so many things, but the skill set now becomes about how do you ask it what to do? And how do you ask it the right questions about how to do things a little bit differently? And so as a basic premise, you can come into Google Ads and you can say, here's my business and here's my bid target. And that could be a cost per acquisition, or it could be a return on ad spend. But a simple example, say that you're a plumber. And for you, a conversion is somebody picking up the phone and booking you for some sort of a service. Now, that could be a cost per acquisition target that you put in play against Google. So on Google, you would say my target cost per acquisition is $30. I'm willing to pay $30 when somebody calls me up and requests service from me. But one way to differentiate yourself would be to say, as a plumber, like, I don't actually care about cost per acquisition. I care about return on ad spend. Now, it's harder for me at the time of the click to communicate back to Google that, oh, this customer needed their toilet fixed, whereas this customer needed their whole house replumbed, or it's a new construction, right? It's a much bigger project. And so the trick becomes about how do you feed back into Google, either in real time or after the fact, that this customer, well, I went in to fix their toilet, but then like these other 5 things were broken and that little contract turned into a much bigger value thing. If you can feed that back into Google, then Google can start figuring out these correlations. And again, something as simple as, in this zip code, people have bigger houses with typically more bathrooms than in this zip code. So all things being equal, I'd rather get a lead from the zip code with the bigger houses than the one with the smaller houses. That's a very simple example, right? So that this becomes now value-based bidding, where even though you as a business may think about lead gen, but it's like, how do you value those leads properly so that the machine, because the machine has no understanding beyond what you give it. If you say, I'm interested in quote unquote conversions and leads, but I value all of these leads the same, then it's going to be just as happy to give you leads to the small jobs. And by the way, those small jobs, your competitors probably aren't bidding quite as much for those. So Google system might actually say, oh, that's better for you, right? It looks cheaper. It's easier to get clicks from this. But every time you go into a job, you're frustrated because you're like, why am I always getting these small jobs? Why can't I get the bigger ones from Google? Well, it's because you haven't communicated to the machine learning system that that's actually your preference, that there is more margin for you, more profit in these bigger jobs. And until you tell it, it's going to keep doing the easy thing, which might be the smaller jobs.
This podcast is brought to you by FounderVideo. We'll cut your LinkedIn ads costs by at least 50% with natural-looking creatives that prospects actually want to consume. Just have an expert in your C-suite show up to a 90-minute interview once a month and let us take care of the rest. Turn LinkedIn ads from an accepted line item expense into a scalable revenue channel that fits into your go-to-market strategy. Book a free consultation at FounderVideo.io.
It's interesting. I mean, when you put it like that, I mean, of course, it makes a ton of sense, but a lot of advertisers might not even know that you can actually feed data into the machine learning system, right? And how do you do so? Well, we'll talk about that later. But I wanted to first talk about, touching on this dichotomy of, are search engines dead or not, and what's the future of Google and whatnot. I found a post from yours doing a sort of a counter argument to what Sam Altman said in one of the episodes with Lex Friedman in the Lex Friedman podcast, in which he said that ChatGPT or generative AI will become the new search engine or will replace existing search engines, right? And in that post, you said that one of the things that I remember is that he was not taking into account that a lot of people that use GPT now and have the $20 a month subscription, it's with their companies, right? And if users had to pay $20 themselves to use that engine in order to find the best responses to their queries, then they wouldn't pay that, or it would be debatable if they would pay that amount, right? And so I want you to develop your thoughts on this. Like, what the question is GPT or generative AI a threat for search engines and their advertisers? And then from there we can
Yeah.
take it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it is something you need to worry about. It's something you need to look at. Generative AI is really good at summarizing or summarization of a lot of information. And so there's a couple of premises. I think the one thing why you shouldn't be worried necessarily is, as an advertiser, you've been advertising on Google, on LinkedIn, on all of these places, and whatever it is, you didn't do this for the love of Google or the love of a search engine. You did it because that was the channel that happened to connect you to the prospects and the customers. And if generative AI and ChatGPT becomes that thing, fine. Optmyzer is going to be there to hold your hand along the way of transitioning maybe from keyword advertising to something that's GPT influenced. Because at the end of the day, I think there's a finite and defined number of conversions in the world. Like so many chairs will be sold, so many new houses will be built, so many cars will be sold, and how people arrive at that sale, that path may change. And so one interesting thing to look at too is within the search engine, people might talk about, like, are the impressions on Google growing or declining? I think they're probably going to decline over time because, no, sorry, the impressions might go up, but the number of clicks might go down, because if summarization comes into play and you have the generative experience from Google, I no longer need to click on 10 links to compare what comes out of that and make my own opinion about it. The generative does that. And so now I do the same number of impressions, I do the same number of searches, I get a quicker answer to what I needed, and I still end up going to the conversion and buying the car that I wanted, that I was intending to buy. Now, if Google doesn't do a good job along the way in terms of its generative, and Sam Altman is right, and people prefer ChatGPT to do this, and they actually want to pay $20, fine, but the same number of cars will be sold. So I think as advertisers, I'm okay. I think we're all going to be fine. Like, the economy is not going to change because of, well, actually, the economy will change because of ChatGPT, because people will be doing different things. But again, the number of conversions is not necessarily going to be impacted that much. But yeah, I mean, if you're Google, you certainly do have to look at what is consumer behavior trending towards. And you just have to be willing to say, like, listen, historically, we've had these blue links on the page, and the whole point was, as an SEO, that you wrote content for the sake of people finding you and then clicking and then researching and then eventually buying something. But, like, was that really necessary? Is that really truly helpful to the consumer? Or did they just want to arrive at that endpoint of the conversion? And that's the thing that's being questioned by ChatGPT and the generative experiences. And so long as you're willing to make that transition along with the consumer, I think as an advertiser, you're going to be fine. But which big company is a winner and a loser in this scheme, that's to be decided.
Super interesting. Yeah, I agree with your take, and I think it's a really great way to look at it. It's like the conversions are gonna be there, and I as an advertiser or as a company, who's owning the platform in which people advertise on, I need to be aware of what's the journey to get to that conversion, because that might change, but the conversion will still be there, right? You're just gonna need to understand the new buyer's journey, so to speak. And in that buyer's journey, I'm not that much of a supporter for GPT becoming the replacement for search or for Google. I think that we're now seeing already a shift in how buyers search and get information specifically about things that they're looking to purchase or want to learn more about before purchasing, right? Whether that is in B2B or B2C, I think social has become the go-to source for that, whether that is on LinkedIn, Reddit, TikTok, YouTube, specifically YouTube, but there's it's a vast array of different platforms that users might want to make use of, depending on where they're from, who they are, what they like, who they're acquainted with, where they work, right? A lot of factors that impact where they are actually searching. But the main common denominator, I think, is social, right? It's platforms in which they can get to interact or have a trustworthy opinion, so to speak, and not the opinion of the advertisers themselves. So how do you think this is going to evolve in the next 5-10 years? Like, do you think social media and paid communities or private spaces, so to speak, within the internet, so-called dark social, it's going to become the only limited, high quality, yet trustworthy source of information in the internet? or will there be a revamp of search that will enable us to get high quality filtered and relevant information through Google?
Yeah, super interesting question. I mean, I think social definitely plays into upper levels of the demand and the consumer journey, right? The premise with search advertising is that someone's already problem aware and even potentially solution aware. But what social does so well is I watch a little video and I'm like, oh, this is a really cool gadget, and I didn't know that the ice that I put in my cocktails wasn't high quality enough. But look, here's like this beautiful ice cube that you can make with this little widget. Okay, and so now I start to think about this and I start doing research, and I still go to the search engines for that. But you're right. I mean, it's the influencers who can really drive that new demand that didn't exist before because people were not problem aware. And social plays a huge role in that. I think the other interesting thing is, as we look at ChatGPT or Perplexity, which is much more directly positioned as a competitor to Google in terms of being a generative search engine, the thing that generative is really good at, again, is summarization. But is it good at knowing what is the most reliable thing that should be summarized? I mean, obviously, you can't go to generative and say, summarize the whole internet for me. That is too big of a job. And so even Perplexity acknowledges that they use some of Google's ranking factors to determine what is it that should be summarized into something that the user is then going to see on the results page. And that's massively expensive. And Google's ranking factors, massively difficult to replicate, is very expensive. And so the generative component that runs on top of that's cool, but it couldn't exist. It couldn't do as good of a job without those underlying factors. And then where does social come in, right? So if social can be trusted, then yeah, absolutely, that should be a signal. Like, who are the influencers? Who are the authoritative people? Who are the helpful people talking about this? And their opinion should be valued more highly. And that should then flow into, again, the summarization and how the response comes out. But there's also a lot of manipulation that happens on social. And that's the thing where the social networks will have to figure this out. And maybe, like you said, private groups or dark social, maybe where you have higher signal, that could become more influential in the ranking. But at the end of the day, I mean, I think we should just think about this in terms of the human element. Like, when you need something, I mean, we've all been conditioned now to go to the internet, but you probably ask your friends, and within your friends, you're selective about, okay, well, this friend likes high-end dining and this one likes fast food restaurants. So if you're going to ask for a great place to take your wife for an anniversary dinner, you're probably going to talk to the friend who happens to like fine dining more than the one who's really always talking about fast food. Had that becomes part of the social algorithms and the ranking algorithms that feed into generative, I think that's going to evolve quite a bit.
Yeah, I agree. I think my guess is that things can only get big at the beginning through centralization, but once things get big enough, the only way to manage them is through decentralization, right? And I think that's what's happened with the internet, right? It's just gotten so big. The only way to manage the overflow of information is through decentralizing its sources. And so that passes by building communities, by building different platforms, by using different tools like Perplexity, but maybe I don't know if you're familiar. I'm sure you're familiar with Chris Walker. They recently launched a niche LLM. He called it, right, and I think that's a huge component, right? Like having access to a tool that not only has the capabilities to summarize all of the info and learn from it, but it's most specifically that it's trained on the kind of info that you want to get insights from, right, as an expert or whatever. And so I think, yeah, that goes to show that
Exactly.
decentralization
And
is kind of like the name
this
of
is
the
one of
game.
my favorite things that I tell advertisers they should really look at is in ChatGPT, you can build your own GPT. Now, the naming is very confusing, right? Like ChatGPT, GPT, but really what this is ChatGPT, OpenAI gives you the ability to train up your own GPT, give it a couple of sources of like, what is your truth? And then you can inform the style. So it's basically like a little bit of prompt engineering, but it starts to live with that GPT. And so I think as an agency, as a marketer, you should have a GPT for every client that you work with. And so you can teach client A's GPT that this is their brand guidelines. These are the things we've tried. They really care about like getting the most conversions, even if it's not that profitable on a per conversion basis. And this other client, they have a completely different philosophy and a different style guideline. And so as you start doing work for these clients, and maybe you write blog posts for them, or you write a LinkedIn post, or you do conversion rate optimization, or you go after keyword research, whatever it is, you're interacting with a GPT that's already got like a baseline of what is the truth and the preference for each of these clients. And so I think that's absolutely the next wave of where we need to go, because like you said, it's GPT in general, the whole internet is too big. We can't, and already it's biased based on what has been written on the internet, right? If you ask for gun control, you're probably going to get something that's more left leaning because they tend to write about that more. If you ask about religion, you're going to get a right leaning answer because they've written more about that. But is that in line with how you want to position it? I don't know. Could be, maybe not. All right. So that's why you build your own GPTs and your niche GPT. I've taken my books, I've put them in GPT. Now you can have a conversation with my book. So if you ask about how PPC should be done, it's not the internet answering. It's, based on my truth. And again, that's the point. I really want people to understand, how do these large language models work, right? That there's basically this thing called grounding. And grounding is like that base level truth that you want the response to use. Now, it still has the whole internet. It still has the large language model behind everything. But like when I go to it and I say, we have this thing called Sidekick in Optmyzer, and you can ask it a question about how is my account doing? Well, LLM doesn't know how your account is doing, but we ground it. We say, okay, here's all the relevant information for this account. Now go and answer it. And it's really good at writing, and it's really good at connecting the dots. So maybe if we say, hey, your conversions have dropped, now we can go and look in the large language model and say, okay, well, generally when conversions have dropped, these might be the 5 things you could try to fix that. Oh, but let's compare that with how Optmyzer thinks about it, or this client thinks about it. And they really like using the technique of maybe increasing budgets because they seem to have more budget available. Okay, so now the response comes back and it's like, oh, boom, that makes sense for me because it's been grounded. It's not just using everything that's possible, and it's honing in. And that's to your point then about, we went from this big decentralization to, again, more customization. And we even see this when we do searches. I mean, if I do a search and you do a search on Google, we're going to get different things because it's personal to us at some level.
Yep. Yes, indeed. I love the idea of building custom GPTs per client because it's it's actually needed. Like there are so many differences you cannot handle, even if you're an expert at something and you try to, scale vertically, right? Or just building the same processes over and over and over and over. If you're doing services, and even if you're doing software at the enterprise level, there's always going to be customization. And the more customization you can provide for the client, the more you can cater your service, or whether that is through software or proper service, so to speak, then the more value you're going to provide to that client, right? So leveraging AI to do that, I think is just, brilliant. Let's talk about Optmyzer. More than 5 billion in ad spend have been managed in the tool. What is it about it that makes it so beneficial for advertisers? And please be thorough with your answer. Like, I like to understand all of the ins and outs, and most importantly for the audience as well, because I've seen that there are a lot of use cases. It's meant for different teams too, and especially I'm curious to learn more about the ML/DL capabilities inside the tool itself, and how does that help just to optimize overall campaigns and to move faster, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I love that question when I get to pitch my own tool. But yeah, so we're almost up to 6 billion. That's billion with a B, not an M. So it's a really big number. But yeah, that's the amount of spend that flows through Optmyzer. And so when we started it 11 years ago now, it was really about saving people time. We knew that in digital marketing, there's a set of best practices that the experts tend to deploy. But Google is trying to build an interface that works for millions of advertisers and doesn't make it too complicated so that more novice advertisers don't get lost. And that was a disconnect. And we said, okay, for those experts with these best practices that are often very tedious to do in the Google Ads interface, that's where we want to build tools and automations. And so a simple example would be, if you're running a shopping campaign, you can split that shopping campaign a certain way. So you can say, I'm going to have one shopping campaign for each brand. And then within each campaign, I'm going to have ad groups for the category of the product. And then maybe I want to have one product group for each individual product. Now, setting that up through the Google Ads interface is massively complicated because you have to make one campaign at a time, and then you can split each one into ad groups at a time. And then you go into each ad group to put in the products. Now, if you have 50,000 products in your catalog, that's going to take you literally the whole week to do. And it's a best practice, but it's super time consuming. Google wants it to be simpler. It's like, just give us everything, we'll figure it out. But you've seen that based on different product lines, maybe there's seasonality components. So that needs to be in a different campaign so you can manipulate those budgets and some of the optimizations that you do. So we make it super easy. We say, just tell us what's in the campaign, what's in the ad group, what's in each of the product groups. Okay, brand, category, product ID. Go. 20 minutes later, we built out that campaign for you automatically. And the kicker is that it keeps it in sync. So every day we're going to take a look at your product feed and say, oh, it looks like there's a new category of product and it fits within this brand. So it means it needs to be in that campaign. So we automatically go and make the new ad group that you needed. And it's done. You're saving a ton of time, right? And so that's one example of the many things you can do. But because you're saving that time, now you can actually, as an agency, be very heavy into experimentation. So you could literally say, I don't know what's the right structure for my account, but because I have a tool that lets me make a structure quickly, I can run it this way for a week, I can test it, I can get data, and then I can run it a different way the next week, and maybe another way the next week, right? It gives me the flexibility to think about what makes most sense and deploy some of these strategies for your clients. And then once you find a great way to do it, now you got all this time to be like, oh, well, Google just came out with this new campaign type, or there's a new automation from generative AI. Let me have some time to actually test this out because I don't have to do all of these other very labor intensive things. And then the other big premise for Optmyzer is we call it PPC insurance, right? As the engines have come out with a lot more automation, that automation can go off the rails. Oftentimes it's doing a good job, but once in a while it's like, I told you, or I put you on automated bidding. Okay, so Google is handling the bidding. All of a sudden you see that there's this one keyword that's spending $50 per click. And you're like, oh, wait, what? Like, I don't even make $50 if I sell that product. Like, why would I ever pay $50 for a click? So it reels that in. It says, well, okay, fine, you can do automated bidding, but like, let's put some boundaries. Let's flag it if it's going a little bit too aggressive in a certain direction. And so it helps you preserve your budget to do the right things. You get notified if things are breaking. Another classic example, your website goes down for a couple of hours. Conversions by nature stop happening because your website's down. All of these machine learning models that Google's using to determine bidding, well, they're like, wow, it looks like conversion rate is really dropping. Like, we're sending you all this traffic, but nothing's happening with it. So let's bid down, let's bid lower. And then once you fix your website, now all of your bids are really low and they don't have a chance to prove that, oh, conversions are back. Like, you should have been back at the old levels. So we can do data exclusions automatically when we notice that something's broken on your end. But these are all the little things that we help you with. And now we also do social. So we have a rule engine for LinkedIn, for Meta ads, for Instagram. So you can take whatever signal from your side, and based on those signals, you can say, this is the thing I want to automate, or I want to automate, or I just want to get a report. Like, one that I really like is, out of all the ads I might be running on LinkedIn, find me the one that's relatively speaking the most expensive. Now, expensive, quote unquote expensive, is often hard to decide what that is, right? Because it's always in context of you as an advertiser. So what's like 2 standard deviations from my account? That's the thing I want to know about. And then I can go and figure out, why is this expensive? Like, did I target it wrong? Is my messaging out of tune with what people are talking about? Some of these things you can automate, and you can say, okay, well, if this is the signal, then this is the reaction I take. And some things are just like about flagging it so that I know and I can go and think about it and then put an action plan in place. So we got that. We got reporting, we got audits, we got rule engines, we got all the shopping campaign capabilities, social capabilities, search capabilities. We can help you prevent wasted spend on the display network by automatically taking out money wasting placements. So yeah, literally huge toolbox of the many things you should be doing, but probably didn't have time if you had to do them manually.
So you told me if we want to do a deep dive into Optmyzer, we're here for 4 hours, basically.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. No, and that's the thing.
Okay.
I mean, listen,
Notice.
anyone listening, like we have a great team that is happy to give you a demo and kind of steer it in the direction that matters for you because yeah, there's a ton of stuff we have.
No, that's good. I mean, if the problem you have to sell your software it's to cater the demo to the specific needs of the customer, that means you already have enough to serve different customers. So that's it's just amazing. I'm sure you look at it when you I don't know, the interface of the website, and it's like 11 years of work and progress in a screen, right? Like it must feel nice. It's a bunch of stuff built in there. I'm interested about the social side of things, though, of course, right? Because we do LinkedIn ads and whatnot. And one thing that we found that is, for example, with Meta, that is a big problem with the kind of people we work with, and other competitors as well too, that try to advertise on Meta, but mostly with the companies that we work with, it's that the kind of traffic that they get from not only Meta but also Google as well is usually unqualified, or they cannot get to target it as well as they can on LinkedIn manually, right? On LinkedIn, you can get to be super specific and whatnot and all that. And with Meta, especially these days when, the algorithm is, usually better than what you can do manually yourself, or at least that's kind of what's understood by marketers, right? So one of the problems that comes up is, okay, I'm paying and I'm getting low clicks and whatnot, low cost clicks, but this traffic is not converting at the win rate that I need it to be for this to be profitable, right? And I think one of the most straightforward solutions is to send back that data to the API from Facebook, right? You can do this manually, like when you set up conversion tracking, letting it know that, hey, this conversion was not actually qualified for us, so this won't count as a conversion, and you can, hook up your CRM or whatever with the API and whatnot. But this is kind of like too technical already for a lot of people. And so I'm wondering if Optmyzer has that feature already in which you can like in some way rate accounts or profiles based on conversions, right? So that you can start getting better traffic from the app platform, or if it's not something that you guys are working on to roll out later in the year
Yeah.
or in the
So you can absolutely
future.
do it today. And like you said, the quality of conversion is really one of the most critical components that you want to feed back into these automation systems. Now, and like you said, sometimes it's a little technically challenging, so you don't do it, but you may still have spreadsheets in your business about the overall numbers. And so in our rule engine, you can do a number of things. So you can make decisions based on the different conversion type from the ad platform, or you can connect it to your own source of data, which could be a spreadsheet, could be some other structured data that you have, and then that can feed into the rule. And so again, simple example here, but you could say, looking at the qualified leads, which I'm feeding in through a spreadsheet for each of the campaigns, if we have a high number of qualified leads and they're coming in below the cost per acquisition target, and we have some budget headroom, then bump up my budget 10%. And because you can put this on an automation, next week, that rule can look at the last 7 days since you made the budget change, and it can say, oh, are we still happy? Okay, another 10% bump. The next week, oh, now we're kind of like hitting the limit, so leave it where it is. And the next week, maybe the market has changed and it's not doing well, decrease the budget by 10% or change the bids, right? Or whatever it is. But you can connect your own data without necessarily having to feed it back into the algorithm. Now, the best thing I think is you should give the algorithm the best data possible, but if you can't, this is a good intermediate step. And at the very least, also, it helps you for reporting, right? Internally, you can start seeing kind of what's working, what's not working to the degree that you want. And if you find you have a big problem, then you can say, okay, now let's put that effort into connecting our data source with Facebook. And by the way, that's something we can help with as well. So if it's challenging, I would say, obviously, talk to an agency like yours or a software vendor like us. This is our bread and butter. So if you don't want to deal with it, we'll deal with it for you. But if you can do it yourself, then absolutely go and do it yourself. Like this is the stuff where the winners are made.
100%, 100%. Tell me about the difference of between Optmyzer and other tools are in the market. The first that comes to mind to me, to compare it is Hyros, because Hyros also lets you optimize a bunch of stuff within ads platforms and whatnot and connect different stuff and whatnot. Now it comes to mind as well, although it's vaguely related, Hockey Stack, because Hockey Stack also can help you, put together a bunch of different data, not only from ad platforms, but also but it's more so, thought of for attribution, most importantly in B2B. But, I'm sure you've done this analysis before multiple times. So what is the difference, right, between other tools and how do you guys compare to others? And because I might not be aware of the direct competition either, right? So if you can enlighten me on that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we've had 11 years of competitors in the search marketing space and now, of course, in the social space. But one thing that we pride ourselves on is we don't want to put lipstick on a pig, right? I think a lot of other tools just take the capabilities of the engines and sort of bring it together in a cross-platform manner, but they don't add a lot of innovation on top of what you could do within the engine. And for us, that was always really important because we recognize that the majority of ad spend goes through Google. And the majority of ad spend in social happens through Meta and Instagram. So for us, it was much more important to take capabilities within platform and have really strong optimizations for that, rather than figuring out how to do things across many platforms. We also always took the philosophy that the data from the platforms, that's really what you should use to optimize. And if you want cross-platform data, well, use Google Analytics. Google has billions of dollars of resources that they can spend on developing stuff. None of the smaller players can compete against that. So we just said, listen, those guys are going to do what they do. We're going to take that data and then enable you to make smarter or take smarter actions with that data. Or we're going to take that data and visualize it in some very interesting way. So we have this really cool tool. It's called the PPC Investigator. And it's like this flow chart, and it starts from revenue. And revenue comes from conversions and value per conversion. And so if your revenue is increasing, we can say, well, it's mostly due to you having a lot more conversions. The revenue per conversion has been steady. Why do you have more conversions? Well, there's been clicks and conversion rate. Oh, well, your conversion rate has gone up quite a bit. Your clicks are the same. And so you start to understand the picture of what is it that's been affecting and helping me deliver this performance. And again, but we look at the underlying data from the platform and we just tell you the story from that in a more understandable format. And of course, now we're integrating that with machine learning and generative AI. So we've always had these beautiful visualizations, but now we can also narrate it for you. And then what's really beautiful is you can even bring this generative assistant into a client meeting, and almost on the fly, you can ask it a question about certain date ranges and it pulls in the data and it gives you this beautiful response that connects the dots. And it says, well, you had more conversions and conversion rate was up and blah, blah. And this could be because of these 5 reasons. And these are the things you changed in your account. And it's like having this instantly responsive assistant who sits in on your meetings and has the answer to almost everything in a fraction of a second. And so it's really exciting stuff that we're able to do for advertisers.
I love that. Tell me about the e-com capabilities, like you told me about, actually you told Jay, but I'm going to say you told me because but this reporting margin tool thing that you guys have for e-com, that is especially great for D2C advertisers, right? To hide their data from Google. And yeah, how does this work, right? Like I'm from what I understood, you merged stock margins and other inventory data, right, to optimize the ads and whatnot. So yeah, can you break that down?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so Google now has these fields that you can include in reporting about profit and cost of goods sold. But some advertisers are worried because do you want to give the auctioneer perfect data about how much profit you're keeping for yourself as you change your bids? And not everyone's comfortable with that. And so what you can do through Optmyzer is you can feed in your cost of goods sold, your shipping cost, your return rates. All of that stays within Optmyzer, but then you tell Optmyzer through a rule engine or through one of the optimizations what it is you're trying to achieve. And so what we then do is we pull the levers that Google gives you, which is the target return on ad spend, or the target cost per acquisition, or the budget or some of the exclusions or the bid limits. We manipulate those. And so all Google sees is what they get from everyone else, but they have no inkling that you set your target return on ad spend to 500%, and that is your break-even point. You make no profit beyond that, or you make a ton of profit beyond that. They don't know. They just know that lever that you pulled and how much you pulled it. And so that enables you over time to then play with that without giving Google that perfect information, which could get them to do things like raise internal thresholds. If Google understood that all of their advertisers were making a ton of profit, they could say, well, we're going to raise this kind of secretive threshold to be a little bit higher. So everybody has to pay 5% more to participate in the auction. They would do, they might, I'm not saying, I think they're by and large a good company. They mean to do the right thing and help advertisers. But again, with not sharing that data, you have a bit more certainty that they can't use it against you. And so that's what we enable. So we have really strong capabilities for D2C and shopping advertisers, e-commerce, mostly on the search engines, a little bit less developed on the social marketplaces, but that's certainly something we're working on. And we've seen really good results from shopping ads on search, on Microsoft ads, on Google ads. So we definitely want to roll that out to Facebook Marketplace as well.
What is your vision for Optmyzer 5 years from now with social features? Like, are you guys looking to, yeah, that's the question. What's your vision?
I think when we came in 11 years ago in search marketing, we just wanted to help solve real problems and do this at a fair price. And basically, our mission was to make marketers better through technology. And part of that whole thinking was, we're all so busy, yet we have hobbies, we have families, we have things we want to pursue. We don't work to work, right? We work to live. And we saw that too many times things were very tedious, very manual, very challenging. And so we said, let's put technology in place to give these marketers back creative freedom, time to think, time to spend with family, whatever it is they wanted to do. And I think it's the same vision with social. Let's identify those biggest time wasters that are still necessary to do to get great results. And let's enable you to not waste that time anymore. And then what you do with the rest of it, come up with great new strategies and move the field forward, move us all forward. That's the role that we want to play. And so we're always very nimble as an organization. Like, we listen to the customer feedback and we like to build fast. And that's how we solve problems.
So no specific features that you plan to add for social ads platforms inside. Yeah, use cases, just what you have in mind. Like, what would you love for Optmyzer to be able to help advertisers with, and what are you seeing, most importantly, that people are struggling with in social? I mean, I could tell you if we start, there's a bunch of stuff that social media ads have wrong, especially platforms. But I want to know your take.
Yeah, it depends on which engine you're talking about, but reporting could be streamlined. I think cross-channel attribution and setting the right bids and sort of understanding the whole journey. And then especially, I think, as that relates to social, to search, everybody takes full credit for everything that came at some point along the way. Obviously, that's going to cause you to double spend on things. So disambiguating between that and putting the right bids at the right levels. A big play, I think, is really about, again, it's that, like, what is your business? Like, what are the particulars to your business that we could bring into the machine learning system to make it do better? Now, these machine learning systems, we cannot manipulate them. These are big systems that Meta has built, that Google has built. The only thing that we can do is we can pull the right levers, but whatever those levers are, that's where we want to play. But we have to understand your full business and do the data integration to your CRM system, to your inventory system. And that's what we enable so that you get better results out the end. So in terms of the big vision, see, Eric Schmidt, when I was at Google, he was always like, the end point is when the advertiser writes a blank check to Google, and Google knows your business so well that we can help you grow. And we know your goals, right? And I think that's a beautiful vision from the ad platforms. We see ourselves as that independent third party that sits between you and Google, taking your blank check, and make sure that they're spending that blank check in the right places. And whatever it takes to do that, and the same thing with Meta and the same thing with LinkedIn, like, their automation technology is going to evolve to a point where we could literally walk away from it and let it do its thing. But we want to be that player that makes them work a little bit harder to get you better results. And exactly what that looks like, I don't know, but that's sort of the mission that we're on.
I love that. I love that quote from Eric. I mean, that's one good thing that is kind of perverse because it requires a lot of knowledge and control about one's business to, just extend me a blank check and we'll be able to grow your business through our ad platform. Then, okay, well, then why do I like, I don't know. As a business owner, at least, and most would probably just, if you want to grow something, you want to grow it by yourself, right? Like otherwise, what's the point of growing it? If it can be grown by someone else, then the mission is theirs, right? So to speak.
Yeah, and I would argue that a lot of small and medium businesses, it's a passion business, right? You got into that business because you liked what I mean. If you're selling, if you have a cake shop, it's because you like baking. Do you necessarily enjoy finding new customers all the time and managing reviews? Like that's the thing you have to do.
Yes,
but you grow your business by having better cakes, and then let someone else.
But what?
Let the influencers.
Yeah, but what? Yeah, but what companies compromise like most of the advertising dollars spent on Google are not from SMB, most like right?
No,
I mean,
that's true. I mean, that's actually another huge change. Like Google, I think became big on SMBs because they made it so easy to advertise. But then now all the big companies have really taken over again. And so, as a smaller company, how do you differentiate yourself? And I think that's where probably social is a little bit more of an outlet because you can show something that's legitimately cool and innovative and new, and then that gets buzz and it starts trending, and now people are searching for it. Yeah, so
would you say that's why most of the ROI in search in startups comes from branded terms? It's because you generate the demand on social because you can talk about something new and cool that people might not, they couldn't hear about through Google because you couldn't bid or outbid your competitors because all your competitors are enterprise. And so once they know about the product, then they search for it, but it's a branded term. So
exactly. I mean, branded terms and remarketing, they get a ton of credit for the efforts that came earlier in that journey. And so absolutely, like you need to be on social, you need to influence, you need to do brand advertising because that brand eventually is the cheapest way you can capture that traffic or remarketing, right? You wrote a great blog post, you did SEO. Now people are searching for you by brand because they've been made solution aware. So absolutely. But then at the same time, can you really walk away and turn off your Google ads? If you're a big brand, you can probably do it for a while because your brand is probably strong enough that people will still find you. As a smaller brand, you often don't have that luxury. And sorry, I don't know why the little thumbs up and thumbs down bubbles randomly appeared.
The reactions thing, yeah. Don't worry. But
yeah,
go ahead.
No, but for as much as like we're a PPC company, like I believe in branding to an extreme degree, and I think the thing is people are at some point going to realize they want to do something, they have a need for something, and at that point if they recognize your brand, whether they search for that brand or not, but then they recognize, oh, that brand can also help me with the thing, and I already like that brand because I've seen them on a podcast or I've read their content, then that's a leg up. And if you're a huge brand, then yeah, whatever that brand is positioned as, and that's what I think it's also so challenging these days, right? As a brand, do you get involved in politics or taking a position on certain things? Because look at what happened with Bud Light. It can help and it can hurt.
100%. Would you say that Meta these days it's all left to creative and there's not much else to do, or would you say there's still a media buying component given how AI has sophisticated the platform so much?
Yeah, and so I'm not the Meta expert to the degree that you are, so I think I'm going to look at you a little bit more for that answer. I think the fundamental difference, though, between search and social is that social thrives much more on freshness of content. So it's funny because on Google, like some ads have been running for 5 years and they're still as effective as they were 5 years ago. On social, obviously, you can't do this, so that's why the creative and the freshness of that creative is such a big factor. And then I think it goes back to like the automation's great, but you have to keep it within certain guidelines, right? If you're T-Mobile, Sure, you can go to Meta and have it make the perfect ad for you, but look at it. It's got a blue background. And we're T-Mobile. No, we're the Magenta company. So how do you work? How do you inform the machine learning that, sure, go and figure out the best thing, but like these are the brand guidelines. This is the font we use. This is the logo. This is the positioning. And so I think staying on top of that, that's still like a huge thing for agencies for sure. And then I think learning and seeing patterns. So what audience is unexpectedly latching onto the message that we have, and why is that? So questioning, right? Like that's one thing we still do really well as humans, and understanding why the things unexpectedly move one way or another. So I think that's a lot of the value we bring. And so the automation of running against these audiences, that is what Meta is bringing. But like understanding why was one thing successful, that's where we come in.
Okay, and just to wrap up, what would you like? Let's say I'm an SMB, whatever, and I'm running ads on Meta or Google too, whatever, and I'm getting conversions, but they're not high quality, so to speak, or they're not the kind of people that I want to or that will buy my product to make my ads profitable. How can I fix that? Because you mentioned talking to the machine learning system and whatnot, but like what would be the advice or the step by step?
Yeah, exactly. If you're an SMB, I think let's start with the simpler stuff first, right? Let's make sure that you've got all your platform settings correct. On Google, a very simple example could be that you're marketing or you're targeting your ad to India, France, United States, etc. The quality of leads, depending on your business coming from India, may be significantly worse quality. So without even really having to inform Google about this is a high quality versus low quality lead, you could just set up a separate campaign with a smaller budget targeting India, and that runs by itself, and it's not taking away budget from your high performing market in the United States, for example. Same thing on Meta. I mean, think about your audiences, right? You could start very broad and let the machine figure it out, but you may already have some insights from having run your small business. It's like, well, most people come to my business from a 20-mile radius or a 10-mile radius or whatever it is, or most people, like my highest value sales come from someone who is getting married soon versus or someone who recently had kids. Take all of those things into account. And then on LinkedIn, the same thing. Like you can target very broadly to everyone who's got a marketing role. But if you have a limited budget in the beginning, I mean, why not be a bit more specific and say, let's start with what I already know is my most likely high value prospect, and it's a digital marketing manager, not an account manager.
Yeah, but that the ICP fit account level stuff, like the targeting, you can figure it out by your own. But let's say all that is figured out, especially, well, I know you're not an expert in Meta, but for Google, right? Like on YouTube, for example, if I'm running ads on YouTube, right, and I already have like the targeting kind of like figured out, but I'm still getting conversion, like people that might not be at the stage that I want them to be, or because on YouTube you cannot target as specifically as you can on LinkedIn, right? On LinkedIn you can get to seniority, you can get to years of experience, you can get to account level, you can get to a bunch of stuff that is gonna set in stone. I know this is the right fit, right? But for YouTube, for example, it's not that easy. So how can you feed data back to Google manually yourself, or using Optmyzer in this case, to have it learn more about what you're looking for in terms of conversions?
Yeah, and again, maybe this is too simple of an answer, but looking at your conversion tracking settings. So within Google, you can set up your conversion the way that you want it. And you can have multiple conversions set up for a single account. And so even ambiguating between or disambiguating between what is each campaign trying to achieve. So we might have a campaign where the real goal is to get people to sign up for a newsletter, and a different campaign where we really want people to sign up to buy the software. And so if you feed each of these campaigns the same goal, then yeah, it's not going to be great if people that you were hoping would buy the software are now just signing up for the newsletter, but you're feeding that as the conversion to Google. So it's going to be like, hey, I'm happy. We're driving a lot of conversions for this company. So for each campaign, like what's the real intent of that campaign and what's the corresponding conversion event? And then even things like, could we differentiate between those conversions? So then the trick becomes, do we have enough conversion volume to meaningfully steer the automation and machine learning algorithm? And so maybe you only have 5 customers who buy your product each month. That's not enough conversion. That's not enough velocity on the data to really inform the machine learning system. So then it becomes about, well, within my own data, like to get these 5 sales, maybe I had 30 people who filled out the lead form. Is there something in common between those patterns? And again, that goes back then to the example of maybe some people came from India, some people came from the United States. And then that could be the factor that you either manually put in the system, or you say, I'm just going to take all the US based lead form fills and I'm going to send that over to Google as a conversion event, so that it's kind of like steering the machine learning system into the direction of where you think it's a little bit closer to the thing you actually want to happen, because that's what the machine learning system then uses. It's like, okay, if that's what it wants, if that's what the advertiser wants me to get, that's what I'm going to go work really hard to get more of.
I'm content with that answer. I think I think that's and you're right. I mean, there's a lot of things that a lot of advertisers get wrong before that point, right? Before arriving at that point. And it's good that you call out the fact that a lot of times it's not enough high volume to think that, fitting that data back will make a change, and if it does, it won't be as significant as you might expect, right? So definitely worth noting that. Okay, cool. So for everyone that might want to learn more about Optmyzer, how can they find you? What is the best way? Any resources available that they should that they should check out, and anything that's coming up for you that you want to promote, feel free to.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So find me on LinkedIn, connect with me on LinkedIn, Frederick Vallaeys. I'm on X or Twitter as Silicon Vallaeys. It's a little play on the word Silicon Valley and my last name Vallaeys, Silicon Vallaeys. And obviously go to Optmyzer. We got a free 2-week trial. So if anyone wants to see our social capabilities or our search capabilities, and we've been winning lots of awards along the way. So a highly respected tool, can't go wrong with it, but we'd love to show you exactly how we can help you and give you a demo. And I also have a show of my own. I hope to have you on that as well, but it's called PPC Town Hall. Very similar to this one. We do video, we have it as a podcast. So it's a great show if you want to hear from other experts, what they have done and what's been working for them.
Awesome. Yeah, will be a pleasure to be in there, and hope to have you back at some point as well. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you, Will. And thanks everyone who listened today.
Thank you for listening to the Founder Video Podcast with Will Martin, and we'll see you on the next episode.